Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jacqueline Dorsey of Lean Frontiers, and I'll serve as your host today. I'm excited to bring to you today a short webinar on TWI and Lean, facilitated by one of North America's most experienced facilitators, Patrick Graupp. So for now, let me turn things over to Patrick.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. The theme of today's talk is going to be TWI and Lean, but more specifically, this series is about trying to break down silos with an approach to Lean. In particular, for today, we're going to be looking at those silos of human resources and that stepchild of HR, which we call training, as well as the operations aspects of it. So we're going to be looking at how how we can use TWI as a bridge, really, to get HR more involved and more directly involved and participating in Lean. And just before we start, just full disclosure, my last job when about 12, 13 years ago, when I finished up after 20 years at Sanyo Electric, I was the North American regional HR manager. So I'm very familiar with this this topic, and also, of course, before that, I was involved for many years in training. That's where I learned about TWI, and so I can address the issues of the HR silos. So why don't we just begin our discussion then by just getting a touchstone here on what human resources management is about. Now, many of you listening may be from HR, or maybe you're working within your organizations trying to get HR more involved in the Lean process. But I just Googled what is HR, and the typical definition is they're the people who are in charge of finding and recruiting and training job applicants, as well as employee benefits and so on. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll find, of course, that there's more to it than just that. HR should be involved in contributing effectively and productively to reaching that's to accomplish. So HR, and so our discussion today is going to be how can we help facilitate the process so that HR is much more directly involved. HR, of course, is involved in people, and when we talk about people, of course, everybody thinks that their role, in the company is the most important role, and they're right. Every job in the company is the most important job, and together that makes a strong company. But what we want to focus our discussion on here initially is the front line, those frontline supervisors, the people who work directly with the operators, with the nurses, or the service people in your organization. And we can kind of compare that to the sergeant in the Army. Here's a quote that I found from General Dwight Eisenhower. You may remember him, or you studied about him in history. He was the leader during World War II of the Allied forces in Europe. General Eisenhower, he was the #1 general, the top general, and he has a lot of good quotes, but he was quoted as saying the sergeant is so in other words, without that sergeant, that frontline supervisor who's leading the group into battle, the Army doesn't. Same thing can be said for companies and organizations. Your frontline supervisor, the person who leads the operators and the nurses and the service people that work for your organization, the people who actually touch the product or meet the patients or give that service to the customers. Who's the person who leads them and gives them direction and motivates them and so on? That's the role we want to talk about today, because that's really what makes our companies effective. Well, traditionally, the supervisor, let's call that person the supervisor, here's the traditional role of the supervisor, and I think that's still true in many, if not most, organizations today. The supervisor is looked at as the boss, the person who watches and makes sure that everybody's doing their job and not, loafing on the job, and, that kind of command and control style. Their job is to make the numbers. and to get the product out the door. But you know, in many respects, even if you don't take such a you know, a negative point of view as a supervisor, you know, supervisors still find themselves separated from the workforce because they're, you know, over the years we've created all of these specialty functions like HR that we're talking about today, and other things like engineering or lean or quality, and so the supervisor is really separated, you know, from the workforce because they don't get involved in all of those details, you know, of the jobs that that were formerly done by supervisors. And so then supervisors find themselves kind of sitting on the fence. You know, they're kind of a buffer between management and the workers, you know, pulled in both directions, trying to, you know, help the operators, you know, get their work done, but at the same time, you know, having to answer to management. And so they're finding they're kind of neither here nor there. It's a really difficult situation and a very frustrating situation, I think, for most people in that role. But, you know, when we talk about lean, we want to change that paradigm, you know, of that command and control. When we want lean to work effectively, we need supervisors to be more than just the boss, telling people what to do. They have to motivate. They have to encourage cooperation to build team spirit. They have to work on keeping good relations between people and addressing problems that come up. We can look at that more specifically if you look at some of the things we're asking supervisors to do in a lean environment. We need them to communicate so that people can accept responsibility for the work, and they have to take on improvement so that they can lead their people to participate in the improvement process. They need to develop teams because we know that our organizations are strongest when they work as a team, and they need to delegate responsibility. So the question is, at this stage, if you look at this screen and also the last one we had, you know, is there anything here that we're looking at right now that is not related to HR? And I look at all of these things: communication, responsibility, teamwork, training. You know, these are all issues that are near and dear to the HR function. If you go back to our definition of HR, you know, in order to accomplish the organization's goals and objectives, I think you can see how important the HR role is in this mission. Well, if we look at lean, of course there's a lot of aspects of lean. We don't have time today to cover them all, but one of the key ones, or one of the central themes of lean, I think you would agree with me, is continuous improvement. It's one of the core ideals of lean, but I think many of you have experienced that continuous improvement never seems to be continuous. You know, we just can't seem to get on track. We try, we go in fits and starts, but people tend to backslide and abandon those improvements. They look to others. They don't take the responsibility to do it day in and day out. They may wait, you know, for things like Kaizen events, or they'll say, well, when the consultants come in, then we'll fix these things. So they're not doing it on a regular basis. Or if you look at that last bullet, I think that's a big one. You know, it's always about making the numbers. You know, once we make the numbers and get everything out, then we'll get to the improvement. And of course, the reality is we never seem to get there because every day is a struggle just to make those numbers. And so what we see then is this kind of continuous improvement going in fits and starts. It looks like what we like to call the sawtooth curve. You see it going up and down. So, you know, it's not that we're not doing efforts to improve. We are. But once we do them, we don't maintain them, and so the standard falls back. And so you see that area there on the right, you know, that area of missing opportunity, because things, you know, have fallen back to where they were before. And this is where TWI comes into play. You know, how do we maintain those improvements so that we can maintain that standard? And there you see the three elements of TWI. Now, again, I don't have time to cover these in detail. If you're new to TWI, we could find out much more about these. There's lots of literature out there. We have the TWI Summit coming up in May. I'm going to be speaking on the day before it starts, you know, spending a whole day covering these three topics. So please join us then. But for now, let me just point out that there are 3 elements of TWI. Job instruction, teaching people how to learn their jobs. Job relations, motivating people by creating good relationships. And then job methods training, which is the improvement part. If you look at these 3 elements of TWI, and then now let's connect them to continuous improvement. These are some points that Masaki Imai pointed out way back in '97 when he introduced the world to Kaizen. And you said, and he indicated these roles for supervisors, and you notice how neatly they align to the 3 elements of TWI: job instruction, job methods, and job relations. So things like preparing standards, ensuring that operators work to standards, improving on that status quo. That would be the Kaizen, or the continuous improvement part. And then, of course, creating a good working environment where people can work together in teams. So let's take a look at these one by one, just really trying to focus on the HR element of it, and to really kind of look at how these TWI methodologies, as I said, form a bridge that bridge us from HR work to Lean, and how we get to Lean. Well, first of all, one of the things that we know from Lean is that in order to have improvement, we have to stabilize the process. We have to create process stability. Or Taiichi Ono, the founder of the Toyota production system, said, without standardization, there is no improvement. We have to have a standard basis of how we do the work, a predictable process. And what TWI then does is it gets rid of that variation. So job instruction, is the methodology by which we effectively train people to perform in a standard way, in a predictable way. And then job relations is the part that motivates people to perform at that standard level. In other words, you can teach people how to do their jobs correctly, but if they don't want to do it, then they're just, as soon as you turn around, they're going to go back to whatever they were doing before. And so that relationship, that motivational part, getting the co-op of people in doing the work, is a vital element along with the instruction. So when we apply these good job instruction and job relations skills, we work very effectively with our people in order to get them to want to perform the jobs in the correct fashion. And when we do that well, then we can create that stable standard, that predictable process, that is so vital to Lean. And again, Lean is HR. I mean, we know that job instruction, training is a big part of the HR mission. Of course, job relations, how people get along. I think that goes without saying. HR is about people and how they work and how they get along in the organization. So, when you think of standard work, many of you are thinking, oh, something like this is just a form that we pulled from Toyota. Engineers, technical people put these things together. And but standard work is not just words and diagrams on a page. It's the real behavior on the floor. Are the operators actually performing according to the standard? You wrote it down, doesn't make it so. There's a lot of work that goes behind getting people to perform based on that standard, and of course that's what TWI job instruction does. So here's a breakdown. If you're familiar with job instruction, you know what this is. We divide that job into important steps, key points, and then the reasons for those key points, and then follow a 4-step method for training operators to perform the job according to this standard. I wish I had time to go over all the details with you, but you can come to the TWI Summit and I'll tell you all about it. But this is a wonderful, powerful method of training people, which not only gets them to do the jobs, but to understand the jobs that they're doing so that they can do them conscientiously with great motivation. So there's the training aspect of HR, which we can put right on the floor. I'll show you a case study here in a couple slides of how a good company was able to do that through their HR function. But before we do that, let's talk about the job relations method. I mentioned that job relations. How do we build motivation and cooperation of people. This is just the fundamental model of job relations. I want to kind of point out, you see the supervisor here has many responsibilities, but at the center of those responsibilities, of course, is people, because a supervisor gets results through people. The supervisor is working through these people in order to fulfill these responsibilities, whether it be production or safety costs, training, quality, maintenance, and so on. And so that job relations line that connects the supervisor to those people is all important. In other words, if we have a strong relationship, we're going to get good results. If that relationship is weak, then we get poor results. Because again, we're talking about people here. It's not like people are not machines. You can't just flip the switch and they work accordingly. We have to build relationships of trust, so that people trust their supervisor is guiding them in the right directions. If I have that strong relationship of trust, then I will much more willingly and with motivation follow the direction of my supervisors, but only when I believe that my supervisor is doing the right thing for me. So that job relations line is so critical to getting the work done. So when we put it together, it looks something like this. First, we build strong relationships, trusting relationships with people. So we have that strong relationship with people. When we do that, then they will be willing to follow our good instructions. That's job instructions. So when we teach them well, they can follow those instructions willingly. And when we do that, then we create standard work. And we use that standard work then to build a foundation for continuous improvement, and that's the job methods aspect of TWI, where we teach them how to improve the process on a regular basis. And we can coach people to think for themselves, to be creative and to come up with ideas for improvement, but only when it's built on a solid foundation of teamwork and good, stable processes. So that brings us back now, kind of going through this quickly. Again, I wish I could go into all the details to show you how those methodologies work, but maybe many of you are familiar with the TWI process, so you just want to kind of see how this all comes together with HR as a focus. How can we break down that silo of HR and get HR people more involved? In this slide, I'm talking about JR, but really TWI overall. If our human resources people are involved with TWI, job instruction training, job relations, job methods improvement. Remember, these are skills that we can teach to those frontline supervisors that we said are so vital to the success of our company. So when HR takes a direct role, then they're actually leading the lean promotion, because these human aspects of lean are so critical for the success of lean. We've heard this many, many times if you talk with people from Toyota. The typical critique that we get from people familiar who have worked at Toyota is that, great, you guys learned the tools that Toyota uses. You've learned the lean tools, but you missed the most important part, and that's the culture. We haven't worked on the culture. You've implemented the tools, but without the culture change, those tools will not give you the results or the sustainable results that you're looking for. And of course, when we talk about culture, we're talking about people. Culture is about people. Culture is the way most of us do things most of the time. And so that's what we mean by culture. And if we want to affect that culture, that's something that the TWI tools will teach your frontline supervisors how to affect that culture. And then again, those are the kinds of things that HR can lead. So when HR takes an active role in TWI, they then create an army of soldiers, literally, right on the front lines that can lead those HR goals. So instead of the HR person trying to solve all the problems or take care of all the people or getting everybody trained, which is really a mission impossible. No one, or a small team of HR people, no one training officer can go out and train all the jobs, and no one HR person can solve or resolve, I should say, all of the problems that happen on an everyday basis. We need an army of people out there working on those initiatives every day. And those are our frontline leaders. So HR should be directing them. And when they do that, when they lead the supervisory workforce in doing these important skills, then the results of that are going to be things that are nearer to the compliance with rules, absenteeism, safety, friction between shifts, teamwork, and acceptance of change. All of those things that HR is trying desperately, to affect, they can do by promoting TWI. Let me show you an example of that. We've been working with the Lego company for several years now, and they created a TWI initiative from their HR department. This was it's a very I should say it's a very rare case, but it was a very effective case. They created a TWI initiative at their headquarters in Denmark, and basically what you're seeing on this slide is you see how they were able to roll out their TWI initiative, literally around the world. NYI, that's Nirachaz, that's in Hungary. LOM is Lego Operations Mexico, that's in Monterrey, Mexico, and BLL is Bilomar. So they had 3 main factories, and then also one more in the Czech Republic, which is the assembly factory. And they created what they called their master trainers from each of those locations. They all talked together through the HR function, and then those folks worked with global trainers and local trainers, and then training down to the employees. And so again, the thing I'm trying to emphasize with this model is that it was this is a program that HR put together. Here's another look at it. You had your master trainers, the training flow on the top. The master trainers would work together and come up with a methodology for training a job. They would train that to the global trainers in English. The global trainers would train that to the local trainers in their local language, Hungarian, Spanish, Danish, and then the local trainers would train the employees. And then what they found is once they set up that training flow, they found that the improvement flow came back the other way. So after they trained people, those learners then had good ideas for improvement. So they channeled their improvement, their Kaizen idea flow back through that same organization that they had created. Now remember, this organization, all of these positions, the master trainers, the global trainers, the local trainers, that was all set up and designed by the HR department at headquarters and then in cooperation with the local HR department. So HR is running this program. And then also, not just anybody could become a trainer. You had to go through a selection process, a recruitment process, literally. And so these are the different things that the HR people looked at when it came to who would be a good trainer. So again, very much HR driven, as you can see. It wasn't just, the best operator became the trainer or the person with the most technical competence. That's typically how things go when we get training on the floor. But since this was an HR run initiative, they put a lot of thought into it. They had a lot of selection criteria. And then once you were selected, you went through a training process. So again, here's all the things that HR was doing in order to develop the local trainers, the global trainers, and the functional area master trainers. So you can see, obviously the global and functional master, they have English proficiency, but not only that, cultural understanding, training and learning skills, along with the job instruction. And then after this, they also added in the job relations. Everyone is getting job relations. And so actually, we literally are talking with Lego this morning. Actually, well, I should say yesterday. They have a new plant that they're opening up in China. And they haven't hired the workers yet, but they hired some of the plant is still, the building is still going up, so there's no production yet. But they have hired their supervisors, some of their supervisors, so they asked us to, and we're working with some of our partners in China, they've asked us to start, they're going to start with 4 JR classes to get the supervisors on the right start. And then they're going to do an instruction trend, some of their new trainers then to San Diego to meet with me. I'm going to teach them how to, train the 10-hour class, and then when they go back, they'll be ready to start breaking down the jobs and training them in. Once they start hiring the local people in China, they'll have all the breakdowns. They'll have the skills. They have picked out the trainers. They have their job relations skills. So they feel, and I think it's going to be very successful, they feel that they're going to be able to turn on that factory very quickly. So I'm excited to see how that works out. So as you can see, this is, again, just to stay to our theme here this morning, this was a system that was driven by HR in order to create good skills, to create good results from the workforce using these lean methodologies, to create a good basis for their lean methodologies. And then the last part is the job methods. The job methods program, really provides that Kaizen element to the frontline management. And again, I can't go into all the details, but it's a methodology through which people can walk through and create improvements on a regular basis. So just kind of this screen just kind of sums up, how those three elements work together. And I think that's what's really critical to keep in mind. Any one of these TWI methodologies works well on its own, but when you put them together, that's really where the synergy starts to happen. I talked about JI and JR. If people are not willing to follow your instructions, they will not, the best training will not get it done. So you really need JI and JR together. Same thing with JI and JM. If you don't, you can come up with a new improvement idea, but if you don't have an instruction method to train it with, then your idea just kind of, fades away. So that's where JI and JM go together. And then finally, JR and JM, when you have people involved in improvement activities, that creates a bigger bond with the team. It enhances the relationships when people have, a say in how they get their work done. So job methods is a way of creating good job relations. So when we put it all together, going back to our original curve, you see that we can have things like lean events or Kaizen events, but once you get to that new level, you need to lock in the standard work. You do that through good job instruction, JI, and then positive environment, the job relations. And then the job methods is a kind of a daily improvement methodology that you can use on a regular basis. So when you put those things together, you see how TWI taps into that productive potential of the people. And I think we can get back, again, to stay on our theme and say that, that's exactly what HR wants. That is the HR mission, to bring out the full potential of the people we bring into the plant, to select the right people, and then to bring out their potential. But to do that, HR people cannot do it themselves. They need to lead and guide these supervisory skills, so that the supervisors on the floor then are bringing out that potential. So the supervisors on the floor are the agents of the HR function. The HR function has to engage and train and follow up and utilize the supervisory workforce so that they can reach the goals that HR needs. And when you do that, now we get back to the lean model. So you see how this TWI fits in with that continuous improvement cycle. And it would be really beneficial to all of your organizations out there, just like Lego did, when HR takes an active role and has a good tool like TWI. And that wasn't the only thing. You can see there were other things that they're utilizing as well. But TWI was a core tool that they were able then to use to make positive influence on their different production facilities, and we're looking forward to seeing those results. So just to kind of close up here, we're coming to the end of our half hour. Lean, we can say, changed the nature of work. In the old mass production era, these were the kinds of things that we took for granted. But in the new lean era, we're looking at things like, zero defects, or a rigorous accountability, reduction in waste, a building in of quality, treating people as a resource, not as an expense. And when you do this, this is where TWI, as that three-legged stool, when it works together, you can see how these three methods then can build a strong infrastructure for your continuous improvement and your lean program. And so just as a final note, if we can get our HR people out of their silo, or HR people, if you can get more involved, use TWI as a bridge. Use TWI as your resource in order to get involved with lean.